All right, so we are back. In today's video, there's really no other way to describe it other than to say we're talking about some absolute and complete bullshit. And no, I'm not talking about the coffee dump I just dropped like a bad habit. I actually mean what I said. We're talking BS with Jake Paul because he had Tyron Woodley on his show. And on the surface of it, it looks crazy. The man that got knocked out by Jake Paul is all of a sudden kicking it with him on his show. But it wasn't a bad move. And in fact, the reason Tyron Woodley was there wasn't for Jake to talk to Tyron about old times and how his face hit the canvas. It was to set up another fight. Tyron Woodley and KSI. And the more I'm around KSI and watch him, I know the way his mind works, but I'm gonna say this and I'll explain why KSI should not take the Tyron Woodley fight. The breakdown. Let's go. All right, so like I said, Tyron Woodley on the show. First off, let's take a look at the background here. Not a bad setup. They got the boxing rings in the back. They got the two co-hosts that have no business being on a sports show, and I guess they make up the letters B and S because Jake Paul's name is on the cover, but this show is barely stable with these two, so it kind of makes sense they're there. Tyron has just sat down in his new age Canadian tuxedo, and the first thing they're going to talk about with him is the reason he's on the show, the KSI fight.
I kind of want to start with the KSI because he's ducking you, bro.
Yeah, I mean, I really don't
get
into like the Twitter war shit. Like I really don't even check Twitter all that much, but my shit started banging. Everybody, did you see this? Did you see this?
Real quick, is that the watch Jake gave him? Because if Tyron is wearing the watch Jake gave him in their face-to-face before he got knocked out on Jake's show with the guy that knocked him out, my man is down bad.
When it comes down to fighting, especially if you want to be respected into the sport, you want to be received welcomely. When it comes down to fighting, you should be willing to fight. Where I'm like, either you want to fight me or you don't.
Yeah, I don't think he does at all. I think he will get his ass whooped.
I think KSI actually does want to fight Tyron. I think he wants to fight him badly. And Tyron makes a good point about if you're going to call someone out, you need to go and sign the contract. Especially what I think they're referring to is the Twitter stuff with him and all the other names that we talked about in a video a couple weeks ago. And I will say, from my own personal view, I want to see our best fight the best. For Tyron Woodley, I consider him to be one of the better guys, especially if we're talking about crossing over and fighting influencers. That's a fucking tough day out for anyone, and KSI included. Now, think if you're KSI's team, though, right? Yes, I've said this is a competitive fight. I do say it's a path for JJ. I think it's one of the most difficult fights he can take, though. And if you're KSI's team, you're going to do what's best for him. Is Tyron Woodley best for him? Think about it. We're going to keep going.
I don't know what y'all smoke is, but I feel like you and him are kind of fighting for that one person that's the real deal out of the two. And I feel like if you fight real deal fighters, you're more likely going to be called the real deal. So
He just hasn't done that. I mean, even he did the poll and you were the #1 voted. He basically, if you all didn't see it, he basically said, who should I fight? And he put like a couple of names. And Tyron got the most votes, like
voted?
800,000 votes.
He got to fight me then.
I don't know.
Why
would he do that though, knowing he's not gonna fight you. He's not gonna fight you, bro.
It is a little confusing that he did that if the plans aren't to fight Tyron, right? It is a little confusing because now KSI has put himself in a corner where if he doesn't fight Tyron and he got that many more votes, it's like, oh, you were scared, yada, yada. And again, I don't think KSI's scared. I do think he wants to fight Tyron. I just think there's probably people in his team that are smart enough, smarter than I am, that don't want to see his career always following Jake's art. You're just fighting Jake's performances, not even the opponent. You're fighting his performances. And if you can't live up, then you're never going to gain that ground. I think that's what his team is looking at.
If he got a lot of votes on it and he put it out there to see, I mean, I can do that and get away with it, but you guys can't because y'all whole shit is like, I won't do this. I bet you I will fucking do it, right?
Exactly.
Or you got to put yourself out there because...
What Tyron's trying to articulate is the fact that when you're an influencer, you can't do this kind of stuff because now you have 1 million people that have seen that result and that have seen and voted. And because you're so ingrained with your fan base, it's like, well, you asked us and we told you, and this is what we want to see, so this is what you should go and do, right? And that's the tough part is that KSI did that. And if it doesn't end up working out, I don't think people will be super upset because I do think KSI is still going to have a challenge with any of those names and possibly some others. So it's not necessarily about Tyron. It's just the fact that the way it looks on social media, you can see how people will skew that story. I just think it's going to come down to that question. the risk and reward. What does Tyron do for you? Of course, Jake is trying to push for this Tyron Woodley and KSI fight for the reasons I've already stated. He wants to see if KSI can beat Tyron, 1 at all, and 2 in a better fashion than Jake. And I truly think this is the biggest point behind why KSI probably shouldn't fight Tyron Woodley. It's not because KSI can't beat him. It's not because KSI doesn't want to fight Tyron Woodley. It's because of the risk and reward factor. What does Tyron do for you versus the risk of actually fighting him? Does Tyron get KSI closer to Jake than Dylan Dennis would or Slim would? In my opinion, no. Experience versus competitive fights means something for KSI. And again, Tyron's competitive, but so is Slim. And so is Dylan Dennis. And so is Dr. Mike. These fights all present danger. What I mean by danger is that KSI is going to lose. That's a possibility. But the fact that you're fighting a guy that Jake's already fought twice, you're now going to have to look better than Jake looked in both of those fights. One where Tyron Woodley, let's be honest, hadn't trained as much because he was filming Cobra Kai. You're going to have to beat him in similar fashion that Jake did, knocking him out or dominating him and then knocking him out. On top of the fact that Tyron is going to be less weight. We talked about this a couple weeks ago. Him taking a full camp to fight KSI and doing it at 185 or 180 pounds or whatever it's going to be is going to leave him more light, more lean, just by proxy of training more. Let me remind you, I think this is a competitive fight. I think KSI wants this fight, and if he does take it, I'm going to be like, cool, let's get it going. But if you're looking at KSI's career going forward, what gets him to Jake? Competition and wins. KSI doesn't need Tyron Woodley to get to Jake. And if you fight him, the biggest danger is losing. But even with the win, if you can't do it as impressively as Jake did, to the general public, you're fighting the performances of Jake, walking in the footsteps of Jake. Or is it because he wants to in some way stick it to Jake and be like, look, see, look what I did. Look at my performance. That's a lose-lose situation too, because no disrespect for me, go in and knock Tyron Woodley out. In my mind, you're top level. That's why I put Jake where he is. But to the people that want that fight with Jake and JJ, they're going to go, wow, that was already what Jake did. I just don't know if it holds that same weight in the public sphere like it used to. Again, to me, it absolutely does. To the mass audience, I don't know. I don't see KSI fighting Tyron Woodley as the best move for him. It's just my opinion, though. You guys let me know down below. Should KSI fight Tyron Woodley? Again, I think personally it's a good fight, but if you're his team, I say no. But I don't have those answers. So, as we figure out JJ's next opponent, guess we'll find out.